Chapter 196. Pei Chi swore that she would never wear that set of clothes again. At 5:00 in the afternoon, after spending time with Pei Mingyi, Pei Chi received a call from Tang Yu. He had a meeting and couldn't leave, so he asked the chauffeur to take her to Xingyuan. Pei Chi bit her lower lip and said, "Just go home directly." However, she was in a good mood today. She wanted to tell Tang Yu later that the medicine and rehabilitation method prescribed by Elon Fighter were really good. She tidied up her small bag and a white sports car came slowly from the front. It was the car that Tang Yu often drove. Pei Chi was about to get into the car when the car window rolled down. The person sitting inside was not the chauffeur, but someone she saw, Shen Lian. Pei Chi had heard of a saying that in this world, an ex-girlfriend was scarier than a mistress. However, she didn't particularly mind Shen Lian. She stood up and smiled faintly. "Miss Shen, what's the matter?" Shen Lian looked like a strong woman. She dressed appropriately and always looked meticulous. She had always been arrogant. She was the only daughter of the Shen family and was going to inherit the family business that was worth tens of billions. In her eyes, a young girl like Pei Chi should be considered a lowly creature. If it weren't for Tang Yu, she wouldn't have had any interaction with Pei Chi. Shen Lian looked up at the small villa behind Pei Chi. Unbearably vulgar. "Get in." She raised her hand and put on her sunglasses. Pei Chi thought for a moment and opened the door to get into the car. After getting in the car, she took out her cell phone and called Tang Yu. "Tell the chauffeur not to pick me up. I'll take a taxi later." "What's the matter?" Tang Yu was in a meeting. He answered the phone with one hand and didn't intend to have a long talk. Pei Chi smiled. "I'm with Shen Lian." Tang Yu was silent for a while, then said, "Don't talk for too long." With that, he hung up and continued with the meeting. He was not worried about Pei Chi at all. His little friend looked very weak, but she was not a little girl who could be easily bullied. He had seen her hit Pei Huan, and even Zhou Meilin had been slapped by her. As for Shen Lian, she had once played an important role in his life, but it had faded over time. She was looking for Pei Chi because she didn't want to give up. Tang Yu thought that maybe he should let Shen Lian know that they were in the past. Never to be together again. It wasn't that she had slept with Anlin, but that he no longer had feelings for her. After Pei Chi hung up the phone, Shen Lian sneered, "Are you afraid that I will do something to you?" "No. I think that Miss Shen's life is much more valuable than mine. Why would you take the risk to do something so unprofitable?" Pei Chi looked ahead and said calmly, "Right now, if I want to die with you, I just need to grab the steering wheel from you." She paused. "Let me tell you, I've never lost a fight." Shen Lian gritted her teeth. "Why did Tang Yu find a wild girl like you?" "I don't know either." Pei Chi suddenly leaned forward and whispered into Shen Lian's ear, "Maybe there's a beast living in his heart, and you don't know it." Shen Lian's car stopped abruptly, and she turned to look at Pei Chi. This little face was very good-looking and young, and there was an inexplicable sense of familiarity. Chapter 197. Pei Chi didn't reply. Shen Lian continued, "Or should I say, do you know why he's with you? You should ask him." Pei Chi spoke very slowly. Shen Lian narrowed her eyes. She had underestimated Pei Chi. She had always been proud and arrogant, and she didn't want to argue with a lowly creature like Pei Chi. Glancing at Pei Chi, Shen Lian said softly, "Because he can't touch me." "Pei Chi, you're the first woman he can touch." Shen Lian's eyes were filled with mockery. "I don't believe that you're in a normal relationship with him. There's only a physical relationship between the two of you." Pei Chi laughed. "What does my relationship with him have to do with you?" A look of anger appeared on Shen Lian's face. I'm his girlfriend. Pei Chi held the car door with her fingers. You're his ex-girlfriend. Miss Shen, don't waste your high IQ. With that, she opened the car door and got out. But when she opened the car door, Shen Lian was a little exasperated. She wanted to lock the car door, but ended up clipping Pei Chi's hand. Pei Chi groaned. Shen Lian unlocked the car door, but Pei Chi's hand was already red. I won't apologize, because I didn't give you permission to leave. Shen Lian was the heir of the Shen family. She had been raised like a princess since she was young, and her family wasn't like Tang Yu's. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that she was a princess. Pei Chi's hand was hurting, but she endured it. She didn't want to show weakness in front of Shen Lian. After getting out of the car, she turned around and looked straight into Shen Lian's eyes. Miss Shen, did you tell Tang Yu that you didn't give him permission to break up? Shen Lian was stunned. How could this be? In front of Tang Yu, she wasn't strong at all, because Tang Yu didn't fall for it. Tang Yu was not a man who would make do with girls. He had always been indifferent when he was with her. When she found out that there was something wrong with him, it was after 2 years of dating that she wanted him. One time, after drinking, she had taken the initiative, but after kissing and touching him for so long, he had no reaction at all. He was not interested in her. This was the biggest insult to Shen Lian. If it was any other man, she would have already humiliated him. But this person was Tang Yu. That noble Tang Yu. They tried many times, and in the end, he took the initiative. For a man, this was probably a very important thing. After about half a year, he gave up on her body. She knew that he had been looking for clean women to experiment on. On weekends, he no longer belonged to her. He was no longer her boyfriend. Instead, he was with different girls. He would look at those young and beautiful bodies and try to possess them. From then on, Shen Lian knew that Tang Yu didn't love her anymore. No man would love a woman and still look for someone else at the same time. Moreover, did he love her? If he did, then why could he do the things that he couldn't do with her, with Pei Chi? Shen Lian sneered. She sat in the driver's seat with her back straight and arrogant. Pei Chi, if there's you, there will be others. With your family background, do you think that Tang Yu will marry you? I've never thought about it. Pei Chi held her injured hand and suddenly laughed. Miss Shen, I will leave him when you get married. Shen Lian flicked her long hair and wound down the car window. The car sped away like an arrow released from a bow. This girl was extremely surly. She wasn't a little lamb at all. Chapter 198. Pei Chi watched from afar as the white sports car drove away. It was only then that she felt a piercing pain in her hand. She pursed her lips and harumphed lightly. It was all his fault for attracting so many girls. However, she also knew that she had no right to blame Tang Yu. She was nothing to him. Just as Shen Lian had said, how could he marry her? They weren't even from the same world. Pei Chi walked slowly on the road, feeling a little cold. A taxi stopped beside her, and she got into it and went to Xingyuan. Tang Yu had been in a meeting the whole time. After she arrived, his second secretary, Xiao Rong, invited her into the CEO's office and told her that Tang Yu's meeting would end at around 7 o'clock. Pei Chi nodded and called out to Xiao Rong, have you ordered a meal for him? Xiao Rong was stunned for a moment before smiling. Secretary Xiao will take care of this. He will probably order a meal for Miss Pei as well, unless the CEO has other arrangements. Pei Chi nodded and went to the sofa to read a book for a while. Because her hand hurt too much, she could only hold it with one hand. After a long time, it was extremely uncomfortable, so she swung it a few times. However, Tang Yu ended the meeting early. He opened the door and saw Pei Chi swinging her arm. What happened to your hand? He closed the door slowly and walked closer. Then, his expression changed. Although her little hand wasn't covered in scars, it was indeed injured. Pei Chi looked at him and said softly, I accidentally pinched my hand. Tang Yu's fingers held her injured hand, and he stared at her for a while before saying slowly, It's Shen Lian, isn't it? Pei Chi didn't say a word. She wasn't a saint. It was Shen Lian who did the right thing. Moreover, what was the point of saying good things about Shen Lian in front of Tang Yu? No one would be grateful to her. They would only think that she was a white lotus and would come to find her endlessly. Tang Yu's expression was very ugly. He went to the secretary's office outside and asked for a first aid kit. When he came back, he held her little hand. Can you move? Are your bones hurt? Pei Chi shook her head. I'm fine. It's just some superficial wounds on the outside. I'm fine inside. He glared at her fiercely. If you're not careful, you're not a child anymore. She suddenly felt wronged. She was clearly his ex-girlfriend, and how could she guard against this kind of thing? Pei Chi did not have the guts to talk back to him. She could only sit there with her mouth pursed and her face slightly turned away. This was already her protest. Tang Yu looked at her and reached out to pinch her little face. You're not convinced? No. She lowered her eyes and remained silent. Tang Yu looked at her and suddenly felt a little sorry for her. She was with him and he was the one who bought her. So, now that she was being wronged, she couldn't be angry at him. He sighed in his heart. After treating the wound, he sat beside her and half forced her to his shoulder. Pei Chi struggled hard, but she couldn't break free. Tang Yu's voice was a little deep. Chi, I've said it before. We're only staying for a period of time. She plucked up her courage on his shoulder. You've also said that when you're tired of playing, Pei Chi. He scolded her in a deep voice. Her voice became softer. You're the one who said that. I also said that we'll get married when we're pregnant. Do you still remember that? He turned his head sideways and looked at her with a cold smile. Pei Chi buried her little face and didn't say a word. She hung her head low. Chapter 199. It was obvious that she wasn't ready yet. But Tang Yu felt that she liked him more or less. Whether a woman liked a man or not, she could feel it when they were having sex. These days, although she didn't take the initiative, she did enjoy it when he wanted her. In the past, he was the one who got the pleasure most of the time. Even if she had that kind of feeling, she was afraid of the matter between men and women. It was a kind of coping. These days, he really felt the union of soul and flesh. Bad child. He patted her little head and didn't say anything else. He had already laid out his feelings in front of her, and it was up to her to think about it. Perhaps, in her heart, she hadn't really let go of Jinrong. Tang Yu almost couldn't believe that he was so indulgent towards a girl. His pride didn't allow her to have someone else in her heart. But he tolerated it. In the past, he didn't tolerate Shen Lian at all. Perhaps it was because Chi was young, so he let her have her way. But there was a voice in his heart that retorted, You fell in love with her because you cared too much about her, so you could only tolerate other things even if you cared. Tang Yu tilted his head. Let's go home. He ruffled her hair. If she looks for you again, just ignore her. She let out a low "oh" and sat up straight. Tang Yu looked at her for a long time before he called out indignantly, Bad child. With that said, he pulled her into his arms and started rubbing her. Pei Chi-Chi's face was a little red. Tang Yu, this is the office. Someone could come in at any time. But he didn't care and came in, determined to tease her. Not only did he rub her, he even lowered his head and kissed her little mouth, stumbling all the way to the office desk. Tang Yu waved his hand and all the documents on the desk fell to the ground. Then, she was carried to the office desk. The cold touch made Pei Chi sober for a moment. Her clothes were already lifted up. His big hand was holding her little waist, and his breath was floating in her little neck. Tang Yu. Her voice was extremely fragile because she could feel his excitement. He kissed her neck lightly, his voice carrying a hint of warmth. Be good, don't move around. It was clear that he was the one who was moving. Pei Chi really didn't dare to move recklessly. She was afraid that he would act recklessly, but she was afraid that he would really act recklessly. His lips went from icy cold to scorching hot. It was so hot that she felt as though she was about to burn up. She could only hug his arm with one hand and beg him weakly. When Xiao Ran opened the door to the CEO's office, he saw this scene and immediately backed out, closing the door behind him. Her face was a little hot because it was too shocking. The CEO had always been a cold person. Who would have thought that he would do such a thing? It was true. They were kissing, but they weren't far from that. No matter how quiet Xiao Ran's voice was, Tang Yu still heard it. His body suddenly tensed up. Then, he cursed under his breath and let out a long breath that was difficult to endure. Restraining his desire, he reached out to pull up her clothes and buttoned them up tightly. Pei Chi was still trembling and didn't dare to look up at him. It's been so long. Haven't you gotten used to it? His voice was also extremely hoarse. Chapter 200. Tang Yu glared at her. Pei Chi, do you still have a virgin complex? Pei Chi didn't dare to. She lowered her eyes and said in an even softer voice, no. She didn't dare to. Hence, Tang Yu immediately put on a superior attitude and said, so you don't want it to be my first time? This. Pei Chi looked up at him with a hint of anger in her eyes. That wasn't the case at all. Ha! He didn't put her down and made her sit on his desk while he stood in the middle. Pei Chi bit her lips and turned her face to the side as she blushed. Tang Yu pinched her chin with his long fingers. Chi. Pei Chi's face was burning hot. She rested her face on his shoulder and grunted. It was rare for Tang Yu to tease a young lady like this. He only felt that there was an indescribable beauty in her being treated like this. His Chi wasn't a weak girl, but she was gentle and obedient in front of him. But occasionally, it would give him some surprises. Tang Yu only realized now that he really wasn't interested in strong women. What he liked was Chi-Chi's personality. She was just right. She was a little afraid of him, but sometimes she couldn't help but resist a little. The way she waved her little paws, Tang Yu chuckled and hugged her little body. Chi, huh? He looked like he had to get an answer. Pei Chi leaned on his shoulder and smelled the fragrance on his body. Her face heated up again and she finally said in a low voice, I hope. After she said that, she realized that she really didn't want him to have someone else's experience. She didn't want him to have done the things that he had done to her to someone else. Pei Chi bit her lip and looked up at Tang Yu. Tang Yu patted her lightly and smiled. Chi, me too. She let out a cry, and he bent his head to kiss her again. This time, it was a very gentle kiss. Tang Yu had kissed her so many times, but this time, it was rare that he didn't use any love jade. He just sucked on her perfectly shaped lips and gently sipped them. After a long time, he finally let go of her. She didn't dare to look at him. She hugged his neck and threw herself into his arms. Her heart was beating fast, and so was his. Her little hand slowly lifted up and reached out to touch his Xiong's chest. Tang Yu. She looked up at him. Tang Yu grunted in acknowledgement and looked down at his little girl. She didn't say anything, she just hugged him. At that moment, she knew that she would never be able to redeem herself. She fell in love with Tang Yu. She fell in love with Zhao Ke's stepson. Pei Chi closed her eyes and hugged his waist. She said softly, "Tang Yu, let's go home, okay?" It was rare for her to be so clingy and proactive. Tang Yu's heart softened. He carried her down and held her hand as they went home. When they got home, Auntie Li had already left, and the food was on the dining table. Tang Yu put down his briefcase. "Wash your hands and eat first." He had never thought that he would one day fall in love with such a domestic lifestyle. He ate and slept with a girl, and she read by the side while he dealt with work. He was such a cold person, but his mind was filled with so many things that he wanted to do with her. For example, having a child in the future. Chapter 201. Tang Yu turned his head to look at her with a puzzled look. Pei Chi-Chi's little hands were unbuttoning his shirt. She rested her face on his shoulder and felt as though it was on fire. Tang Yu was a man. How could he not understand what she meant? However, other than that time when she had a fever in the rain, she had never taken the initiative when it came to sex. Tang Yu exhaled with difficulty. He lowered his head and asked in a hoarse voice, "Are you sure?" Pei Chi-Chi's little hands were on his belt and she was unbuttoning it messily. He would not let go of such good luck. He raised his hand to unbutton his shirt and grabbed her little hand. "It's not what I want. Why aren't you moving?" He lowered his head to touch her forehead and asked in a hoarse voice. Pei Chi-Chi couldn't avoid him. He could stick to her no matter where she turned her head. In the end, she panted and fell on his shoulder. "Tang Yu," her voice was as weak and pitiful as a kitten's. He lowered his head and kissed her. Then, he carried her into the bedroom. After a few rounds of indulgence, she lay in his arms like a little beast. Her little hands were gentle and she was still restless. Tang Yu lowered his head and looked at her. His voice was especially seductive in the dark. "Still want?" Pei Chi-Chi's little hands were hugging him shamelessly. Tang Yu smiled. He knew that she had overdone it. He was in the prime of his life, while Chi-Chi was still a child. Her body was not ready for so much pleasure. Hence, every time they did it, she would be so scared that she would cry in the end. She was too young and inexperienced. She was not a woman at all. Tang Yu felt pity for her. He looked up and kissed her. "Let's take a shower then." She replied with a She felt a little uncomfortable all over, especially, it hurt a little. Tang Yu carried her to take a shower and they had dinner together. Pei Chi-Chi was so tired that she fell asleep just like that. Tang Yu sat beside her and looked at her. He reached out and gently brushed her hair aside. His actions were gentle, and then he held her little hand that was injured today. His eyes dimmed a little. He should talk to Shen Lian. He leaned forward and kissed Pei Chi-Chi. When he looked up, his gaze was still lingering. In this world, there was only one little thing that he was willing to do everything for. Tang Yu walked into the changing room and changed his clothes. Sitting in the car, he picked up his phone and dialed a number. "See you in an hour," he said curtly, and hung up. Ting Feng was a bar in B City. Tang Yu would come here occasionally. He had been sitting in the corner for 10 minutes. He held a cigarette between his slender fingers and smoked it slowly. Shen Lian silently sat in front of him. Tonight, she wore a black dress with thin straps, which showed off her good figure and looked very charming. "Tang Yu." She sat in front of him and took out a slim and long lady cigarette. She leaned over slightly and lit it up. Then she took an elegant puff. Tang Yu looked at her with an unfathomable gaze. "When did you learn to smoke?" "The day you didn't want me." Shen Lian smiled and lowered the cigarette. "I learned a lot of things that day." Tang Yu, do you want to know? She raised her head slightly. There was a hint of provocation and seduction in her eyes. Chapter 202. Shen Lian's expression changed slightly. Did Pei Chi tell you that? She's my girlfriend. Is that wrong? Tang Yu looked into Shen Lian's eyes. Don't look for her in the future. She's still young. Shen Lian narrowed her eyes and looked at Tang Yu. He was still indifferent. That matter between us is in the past. Shen Lian, let it go. Let it go. Shen Lian tilted her head and looked at him. Tang Yu, you've let it go, but I can't. She was upset and wanted to smoke again, but Tang Yu snatched it away before she could. Don't smoke so much. Shen Lian's hand quickly covered the back of his hand. Her eyes were a little blurred under the light. Tang Yu, he wanted to pull away, but she stubbornly refused to let him. Why her? Is she better than me? Shen Lian's eyes were hurt. I can accept you finding a virtuous girl from a prestigious family, but why such an unremarkable girl? Just because she's young and pretty. Tang Yu looked at her for a long time before he chuckled softly. Probably. At this moment, he also pulled his hand back and said seriously, We're done, Shen Lian. Anlin has been waiting for you. I don't love him. Shen Lian suddenly seemed to lose her temper and couldn't bear it anymore. But she immediately realized that she had lost her composure. She had always paid attention to etiquette and wouldn't lose her composure like this outside, so she immediately kept quiet. Tang Yu didn't say anything and just stared at her. Shen Lian calmed down a little and murmured, You've been with her for the past 2 years when I wasn't in the country. Tang Yu didn't say anything. There was no need to tell others about his relationship with Chi-Chi. He looked at Shen Lian. Did you drive? I'll send you back. Shen Lian would not act like a shrew. She stood up quietly and said, I have a car. They walked to the parking lot together. The cars were parked side by side. When Shen Lian pulled open the car door, she turned to look at Tang Yu. You love her? Tang Yu paused and turned to look at Shen Lian. This answer was a little cruel to ex-girlfriends, especially those who hadn't given up yet. But if he didn't say it, it would be even crueler. He nodded slightly. Yes. What do you like about her? Shen Lian raised her eyebrows and asked mockingly. Tang Yu lowered his eyes. Under the waning lights, his eyes flashed with a touch of gentleness. It's probably because she's still young and not very obedient. Just based on the fact that he could touch her and just based on her good looks, Tang Yu would not be tempted. And, of course, the noodles under her, which also gripped his stomach. It should be said that Pei Chi was very much to Tang Yu's liking. It was very comfortable to get along with her. Shen Lian caught the touch of gentleness in his eyes and forced a smile. Who hasn't been young before? When she was with him, she was also very young and had never seen him so protective of her. However, Shen Lian had miscalculated one thing. When Pei Chi was with Tang Yu was already mature enough and naturally treated young girls differently. Tang Yu smiled faintly. Before getting into the car, he said lightly, Chi is not like you. She has nothing. Don't bully her. Shen Lian smiled faintly. Really? But Tang Yu, what do you think I have? The Shen family's assets. Or something else? Tang Yu was indifferent and did not speak. Chapter 203. Tang Yu didn't answer her directly. He just said, I'm sorry. He quickly opened the car door and got into the car. Shen Lian just looked at him and watched his car leave. Before her tears could fall, she raised her head. In fact, she knew in her heart that Tang Yu wouldn't want her just because she had slept with Qin Anlin. He was such a proud man. When Tang Yu returned to the apartment in Xia City, Pei Chi was still sleeping. She was curled up in the quilt, only her little head was outside. Tang Yu looked at her quietly. He sat down and reached out to touch her little hand. He knew in his heart that the reason why Shen Lian looked for him was because Shen Lian wanted to see him. And he really needed to make it clear to her. He knew Shen Lian's personality very well, and he didn't want Chi to be wronged. He reached out and touched her little face gently. He wondered when she would grow up. He almost couldn't wait to propose to her. But she was too young. Would it scare her? Tang Yu smiled lightly. He actually felt a little happy. Shen Lian asked him if he loved Chi. It should be love. He only knew that he had never liked a little girl so much. He wanted to give everything he had to her. When he saw her smile, he felt a sense of accomplishment. When he saw her happy that Pei Ming had reconciled, he felt that everything was worth it. When Tang Yu took a shower and returned to the bed in the bedroom, it was already 12:00. Probably feeling his warmth, Pei Chi automatically nestled in his arms. Tang Yu sighed softly and kissed her. She felt warm all over. Tang Yu. She woke up in a daze. She opened her eyes and looked up at him. He grunted, "I went out for a while." "Be good and sleep." "Oh," Pei Chi replied, then nestled in his arms again. After a while, she seemed to have thought of something. Daddy can speak simple words today. She wanted to share it with him. Although he was busy every day and might not take it seriously, she still wanted to tell him. Tang Yu was already a very important person to Pei Chi. When Tang Yu heard this, he lowered his head and kissed her on the lips. "That's good. Are you happy?" To Tang Yu, even a small matter of hers was a huge matter. "Yes." She nodded heavily and looked up at Tang Yu. "I'm so happy that I'm going crazy." He smiled and stroked her hair, his voice a little husky. "As long as you're happy." She rubbed her face against his chest like a little lunatic. Even though they had done it 2 or 3 times today, Tang Yu was still aroused. His gaze was deep. "Chi, don't even think about sleeping if you continue like this." Pei Chi laid on his chest, purposely nibbling on a certain spot. Tang Yu let out a low grunt. Grabbing her hair, he pulled her onto his body. Pei Chi lay in his arms, her little mouth on his neck. Her voice was muffled. "It's okay if you don't sleep." This was a mess. He pinched her little chin and dragged her over. He looked at her deeply and said in a seductive tone, "Pei Chi, you do it." She bit her little mouth, looked at his beautiful and clean chin, and boldly planted her little mouth on his lips. Chapter 204. After a while, she hugged his neck and said in a low voice, "Tang Yu, I don't know how to, then I'll teach you." He cupped her little face. "Little girl, what do you want to learn today?" She was so embarrassed that she turned her face away, but she couldn't escape. Tang Yu still tormented her for a long time. Early in the morning, when Pei Chi woke up, Tang Yu was tying his tie by the bedside. When he saw her open her eyes, he smiled faintly. "You're awake." Pei Chi grunted in response. She grabbed the watch beside her and looked at the time. It was already 9:00. "It's Saturday today," Mr. Tang said slowly. Pei Chi replied, "What about you?" Tang Yu smiled. "There's an important meeting today. It'll end around 3:00 in the afternoon." "Chi, are you going to visit Uncle?" Pei Chi acutely sensed the way he addressed her. She sat there, feeling a little helpless. But in Tang Yu's eyes, she was extremely adorable. Her long black hair was messily draped over her shoulders. Her pajamas slid down, and there were bite marks on her snow-white shoulders. At this moment, she bit her lips and looked at him pitifully. Then I'll pick you up at 3:00 in the afternoon. We'll eat out together. He leaned over and kissed her. I have to go to the meeting. Get up and eat something, With that said, he rubbed her twice again, and Pei Chi blushed. Tang Yu chuckled hoarsely. He scratched her little nose and walked out. Pei Chi got up and walked to the bathroom to brush her teeth in front of the mirror. But when she looked up, she was a little stunned. Was the person in the mirror herself? Her face was rosy and her eyes were blurry. She looked as if she had been loved. She was stunned, and her brushing her teeth slowed down. She recalled what Pei Huan had said to her. Pei Huan had said, Pei Chi, you've fallen in love with Tang Yu. Pei Chi brushed her teeth for a full 10 minutes. In the end, she almost forgot about the water. When she went out, her legs were a little wobbly. On one hand, it was because he had asked for too much last night. On the other hand, she was also a little dazed. Pei Chi took a taxi to Qingshui Road. As soon as she entered, she saw Pei Huan watering the plants with a kettle. His stomach was obviously not big, but he kept holding it up in an exaggerated manner. Seeing Pei Chi come in, Pei Huan sneered, Pei Chi, you still have time to come here today. Why aren't you looking at Tang Yu? Pei Chi ignored her, but Pei Huan stopped her. Aren't you curious about what happened? Her face was filled with malice. I'm not curious. Pei Chi's voice was a little cold. She really felt that Pei Huan was schizophrenic. Pei Huan giggled. Pei Chi, you must not have thought. Actually, all men are the same. Moreover, the other party is talented, beautiful, and the only daughter of the Shen family. You are probably just a spice for Tang Yu. She took a newspaper from the chair at the side and showed it to Pei Chi. Take a look, Pei Chi. Cinderella is Cinderella. Once it's past 12, she'll show her true colors very soon. Pei Chi lowered her head and looked at the headline of the newspaper. There was a photo on it. She could clearly see that it was Tang Yu and Shen Lian. They stood in the parking lot, staring at each other, and it was a perfect shot of them looking at each other. Chapter 205. Pei Huan felt that today's weather was especially good, and it was especially satisfying. This was because Pei Chi was about to become a mistress. Shen Lian's family background could not accommodate Pei Chi's status. Pei Chi lowered her head and smiled. She put the newspaper aside. I'm glad that you're so happy. Pei Huan, you have to keep it up. It's good for the baby. Pei Huan was furious. She glared at Pei Chi. You're going to cry. She just couldn't stand the way Pei Chi occupied everything. Jinrong liked her. Even when Pei Mingyi was at home, he couldn't touch him. Sometimes, he would secretly look at Pei Chi's photo. Wasn't she his daughter? Now that she was pregnant with the baby, shouldn't she treasure it even more? Pei Huan snatched the photo from Pei Mingyi's hands last night and cried in anger. Pei Mingyi only looked at Pei Huan. His body trembled, and he couldn't say a word. He looked a little scary. Later, Pei Huan ran out. She didn't see that Pei Mingyi's body was slanted on the bed. He moved with difficulty. He wanted to get out of bed to pick up the photo, but his legs couldn't move. He moved and moved until he fell off the bed. At this moment, Pei Huan blamed everything on Pei Chi. She was extremely happy. She felt that Pei Chi's life was coming to an end. But even so, her mouth was still so sharp. Don't be too happy. I'll wait for the day Tang Yu chases you away. Let me tell you, the Pei family will not take you in. Pei Huan sneered and ignored Pei Chi. Pei Chi couldn't be bothered with her. regarding Tang Yu and Xun Lian. She didn't trust them. But she knew that Tang Yu was not the kind of man who would flirt with his ex-girlfriend in the middle of the night. If he wanted to, he could have chased her away. He didn't have to do this. She walked into Pei Mingyi's bedroom. Pei Mingyi was sitting on the bed. He looked a little depressed. There were a few pieces of photo in his hands. Dad. Pei Chi saw that it was her photo and guessed what had happened. Her heart ached a little as she gently stroked his head. Next time, I'll take a better photo. Dad, throw this away. She gently pulled her hand away, but Pei Mingyi immediately tightened his grip and refused to let go. Dad. Pei Chi squatted down and hugged him. She suddenly said, Dad, let's move out, okay? Pei Mingyi heard this and looked up at Pei Chi. I was wrong. Pei Chi stroked his swollen fingers and murmured, I always felt that I should give you a good home, but I was wrong. They didn't treat you well. She owed Tang Yu a debt that she would never be able to repay in this lifetime. She could sell her body, but she could also sell her heart. Didn't Tang Yu want her heart? Then she should give it to him. Pei Chi closed her eyes. This was the last thing she wanted. How could a person's heart be bought and sold? She owed Pei Mingyi. If she hadn't been so naive and believed Zhou Meilin so easily, her dad wouldn't have ended up like this. It had always been her who was too weak. Pei Mingyi's lips trembled as his finger pointed in the direction of the door. Pei Chi followed his finger and saw Zhou Meilin standing at the door with a pale face. Zhou Meilin was almost screaming, Pei Mingyi, how could you do this to me? She held a stack of documents in her hands and her fingers couldn't help but tremble. Chapter 206. But what did she see? He had given the company to that bitch, Pei Chi. And she only had this house. There was a photo of that bitch in the safe. After so many years, that woman was still haunting her. Zhou Meilin felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over her heart. No matter what, she was Pei Mingyi's legitimate wife. However, he had given his heart to that bitch and the company to Pei Chi. What about her? What did she have? She had nothing. Zhou Meilin stared at Pei Chi like a dead fish. You're here to collect the debt. Pei Chi looked at the thing in her hand and then looked at Pei Mingyi. Pei Mingyi's fingers were trembling, and so was his body. He stared straight at Zhou Meilin. Pei Mingyi, do you really treasure that bitch's child? All these years, have you been unable to forget her? Zhou Meilin was almost screaming. She ran over and threw the will on him. She cried out, how could you do this to me? Pei Mingyi, you bastard. Pei Mingyi could only look at her from the corner of his eyes, unable to say a word. After a while, Zhou Meilin suddenly reached out and grabbed Pei Mingyi's throat. Say something, you bastard. Pei Chi tried to pull him away, but Zhou Meilin was so strong that she pushed Pei Chi down. How could Pei Mingyi say anything? Zhou Meilin aimed at Pei Chi again and tugged at Pei Chi's hair. You bitch, why didn't you die back then? Why did you have to live in this world to torment me? Pei Chi was in so much pain that she felt like her skin was about to fall off. She pushed Zhou Meilin away with all her might. Her scalp was numb. Auntie, what are you doing? Dad needs to rest now. Why should I care about him? He doesn't care about me and Huan at all. Zhou Meilin looked like she was about to die. She sneered at the man who had been weak all his life. She really didn't expect that he would play such a dirty trick on her. Pei Mingyi was really a good person. He secretly gave the company to Pei Chi. She screamed crazily, Pei Mingyi, you think that Pei Chi is a good person. You gave the company to her, but let me tell you, she began to laugh maniacally until tears came out of her eyes. Pei Chi's voice was stern. Auntie. Her heart was beating very fast. She knew what Zhou Meilin was going to say. At this moment, she even wanted to kill Zhou Meilin. However, Zhou Meilin had completely given up. She screamed hysterically, "Pei Mingyi, do you think that Pei Qiqi is still your good daughter? Stop dreaming. When you were first hospitalized, I sold Pei Qiqi. Now, she sleeps with men every day." She was crying and had a strange smile on her face. Think about it. Your baby is pressed down by men every day and has to do all kinds of things. Isn't it painful? Isn't it uncomfortable? Pei Mingyi's finger was raised and pointed at Zhou Meilin. He just stood there stiffly, his neck was stiff and his gaze was straight. He looked like he couldn't believe it. His eyes widened, his baby. Zhou Meilin. If he could, he wanted to strangle her to death with his own hands. How could she treat Qiqi like that? She treated my baby. Chapter 207. She looked at Pei Mingyi and cried out, "Daddy, please believe me this once." I didn't. Pei Mingyi's finger was still pointing at Zhou Meilin. His finger didn't move an inch, and his gaze was, just like that, they froze, and then dissipated. Pei Qiqi's tears didn't stop. With trembling hands, she dialed 120 and quickly called for an ambulance. Then, she threw herself on Pei Mingyi and reached out to help him smooth out the wrinkles on his face. But he still didn't move. She looked into his eyes anxiously. Her little hands grabbed his shirt, and her fingernails almost turned red, but Pei Mingyi couldn't respond to her anymore. He remained in his original position and didn't move an inch. He just stared at Zhou Meilin until her hair stood on end. At the door, Pei Huan's scream rang out. Pei Qiqi was in a trance. She looked at Pei Mingyi's slowly collapsing body, and her vision was a blur. Pei Mingyi was dead. He died of a brain hemorrhage. In the chaos, Pei Qiqi felt like she was being pushed around. She stumbled and fell into a warm embrace. She looked up and saw Tang Yu. She looked straight at him and said softly, "Tang Yu, Daddy is gone. I don't have Daddy anymore. I'll have nothing in the future." As she said that, her tears fell. She was in a daze, and it was as if she had been sucked dry. The emergency doctor gave her a death sentence, and the Pei family immediately held a funeral. Zhou Meilin was also stunned. She only wanted to get what she deserved, but she didn't expect to anger Pei Mingyi to death. That night, Pei Qiqi sat there burning joss paper for Pei Mingyi. She was no longer unconscious. She murmured, "Daddy, I wonder if there will be a doctor downstairs, and if he can take care of your leg." As she said that, she sniffled and said, "What will Qiqi do if you leave?" But she didn't know that she wasn't Pei Mingyi's biological son, but that man had given his love to her selflessly. Tang Yu stood not too far away. He watched as she knelt for half the night as if she did not know fatigue. She just knelt there without eating or drinking. All of a sudden, he felt a little envious. There was someone who could make Pei Qiqi's heart ache so much. Walking forward, he carried her gently. "Qiqi, take a break. We still have things to do tomorrow." Pei Qiqi was stunned for a moment before she realized that it was Tang Yu. She pursed her lips and said very softly, "I don't want to rest. I want to accompany Dad. He's alone and very lonely." She looked at Pei Mingyi's coffin and said, "Tang Yu, I won't be able to see him anymore even if I want to. You still have me." He rested his chin on the top of her head, giving her a little warmth. Her body was small and thin, but she had endured so much. He wanted to give her everything, but sometimes he didn't know where to start. Her dependence on him was limited to what she was willing to accept. Pei Qiqi listened to his words and was in a daze again. She turned her head and looked at him under the cold light. Even in a place like this, he still exuded a noble aura. Nothing could conceal his elegance. Pei Chi smiled absent-mindedly. Tang Yu, do you know that in this world, the person I can't like the most is you, hurting others and hurting oneself. She silently muttered these words in her heart before her body fell limply. Tang Yu reached out to catch her. Looking down at her pale face, his heart ached slightly. Chapter 208. Their eyes met, and Tang Yu nodded slightly. I'll take Chi-Chi away first. Lin Jinrong didn't say anything. He just stood there. Tang Yu carried Pei Chi-Chi back to Xia City. She woke up in a daze, but she didn't speak because she was overwhelmed with grief. In the dark, she cried hoarsely in his arms. Her tears soaked his shirt, making it wet and uncomfortable. But he couldn't let her go. That night, he held her in his arms and didn't let go. The next day, Zhou Meilin recovered. She didn't allow Pei Chi-Chi to attend Pei Mingyi's funeral, but she didn't make it to the end with Tang Yu there. Pei Chi-Chi held Pei Mingyi's photo in her hands. Looking at his smiling face in the photo, she was in so much pain that she wanted to die. On the day of the burial, the weather was gloomy. The cemetery was deserted, and it made one's heart feel heavy. Pei Chi-Chi stood there and said to Pei Mingyi softly, "Dad, I'll fulfill your last wish for you." In the past, she was too weak. That was why Zhou Meilin had harmed her and her dad. After Pei Mingyi passed away, she thought about it a lot. It was because she wanted to give her dad a perfect family that he ended up like this. She wouldn't do it again. She wanted Zhou Meilin to pay the price. Her heart was filled with hatred. Zhou Meilin heard it. She clenched her fists tightly and said to Pei Huan, "See? Your dad's body hasn't even gotten cold, and this bitch is already plotting to steal the Pei family's assets." Pei Huan put her finger on the back of Zhou Meilin's hand. "Mom, I'm here. She can forget about it." Just as she finished speaking, she met Pei Chi-Chi's gaze. Pei Huan's heart froze, and so did Zhou Meilin's. In the past, this bastard's gaze had already made people uncomfortable. Now, it made people shiver even though it was not cold. Pei Chi-Chi ignored them. She closed her eyes and bowed 3 times respectfully to Pei Mingyi. "Dad, I'll protect the Pei family and everything you've built." She would take away whatever Zhou Meilin wanted. A week later, the Pei Corporation's senior management sat in the meeting room. Most of them were veterans who had worked with Pei Mingyi in the past. Zhou Meilin sat at the head of the table. She wiped her tears and sighed. "Old Pei left early, and you guys have been with them for so many years. I don't know much, so I'll need your help in the future." Although the current Pei group wasn't doing very well, they still had a breath left in them. Moreover, they couldn't let go of such a valuable piece of land. Zhou Meilin wasn't stupid. Many big companies had their eyes on the Pei Corporation. No, this piece of land, she was just waiting for the right opportunity and the right price to sell the company. Yen Liu would be. The directors were touched by her emotional performance. They nodded and said, "Yes, yes. Old Mr. Pei was good to us in the past. We will definitely support the company now." Zhou Meilin was comforted and forced a smile. "Then I'll leave it to you all." Pei Huan was the one who came up with the idea. She couldn't drag on the company's affairs for too long. She had to calm these people down and secretly look for a buyer. She would sell the company at the first opportunity, lest that bitch Pei Chi-Chi cause trouble. Just as Zhou Meilin was daydreaming, the meeting room door suddenly opened. The ones who entered were Pei Chi-Chi and 2 lawyers. Chapter 209. Pei Chi-Chi looked at the people in the meeting room before her gaze landed on Zhou Meilin. She said calmly, "Auntie, I don't think you're aware of Dad's will." Zhou Meilin's expression changed drastically, but she sneered after a while. "Your father passed away, so I should be the one to take over the company. Am I wrong? Pei Chi inched closer to her. She looked into her eyes and said slowly, so you made Dad die because you wanted to take over his company. Pei Chi, you're spouting nonsense. Zhou Meilin could no longer sit still. She raised her voice and said, get the security to chase her away. There was a hint of coldness in Pei Chi's eyes. She threw a stack of photos on the conference table, and with a bang, the photos scattered everywhere. Auntie, after you see this, we can discuss whether you or me should leave the company. Pei Chi sat at the end of the table and looked at Zhou Meilin coldly. Zhou Meilin looked at the scattered photos on the table and was stunned. Then she saw a large photo of her and Rong Lei. Her fingers trembled. This isn't real. These are synthetic. Pei Chi, you traitor. You colluded with an outsider to harm me. Is that so, Auntie? Do you want your gigolo to come here himself? Then you'll admit it. Pei Chi took out a recording pen from her pocket. She pressed a button and a sound came from the recording. Even if one turned to ashes, one could tell that it was Zhou Meilin's voice. That bastard is at home. He can't go anywhere. Don't do it in the car. Let's go get a room. Then there was the sound of a man and a woman doing something. There was also a hoarse male voice. What are you afraid of? It's more exciting here. They couldn't bear to listen anymore. What good could an old woman and a gigolo do? Zhou Meilin's face turned red and white. She was speechless for a long time. The senior executives looked at each other and didn't know what to say. Poor old Pei. He had always been a good person, but now he was trampled on by a slut. Pei Chi looked to the side. Lawyer Zhang, can you announce Dad's will now? No one objected to Pei Chi becoming the successor of the Pei Corporation. Zhou Meilin cried and screamed for a long time before being thrown out by the guards. An hour later, Pei Chi sat in Pei Mingyi's office, caressing the things that belonged to him. A girl knocked on the door. Boss Pei, I'm old Mr. Pei's secretary. You can call me little one. Pei Chi forced a smile. All right, little one. Bring the company's documents over for me to see. Little one pondered for a moment before saying, Boss Pei, you're still young. The company's situation isn't too good now. Should we hire a professional manager to manage the company? Mr. Pei had the intention to do so in the past. Pei Chi knew that she meant well. Xiaowen was a few years older than her, but, if I hire someone to manage the company will never be able to develop. In less than a year, those people will persuade me to sell the Pei Corporation. Pei Chi knew that many of those management companies were independent subordinates of big companies. Sometimes, they would be swallowed up as they were being managed. Little one nodded. All right, but there's a lot. In the end, she carried a stack of documents that was about half the height of a person. Pei Chi couldn't understand them at all, but even so, she forced herself to continue reading. By the time she returned to Xia City, it was already 10:30 p.m. The moment she entered, she saw Tang Yut sitting on the sofa in the living room with a business magazine in his hand. Chapter 210. Pei Chi stood there for a long time without moving. Slowly, she said, Do you object? Tang Yu was still sitting, but he raised his eyebrows slightly. What about your studies? In fact, he did not approve of her taking over the company directly. She was still young and inexperienced, so she could not manage a company properly. Moreover, he could not bear for her to work so hard. Pei Chi looked down. I want to take a break from school. Tang Yu frowned even more. He looked at her and did not speak for a long time. Pei Chi bit her lip. It's just a year off. When the company is on track, I'll go back and finish my studies. Is that okay? Seeing that he was not saying anything, Pei Chi walked over, squatted down, and leaned into his arms. She said in a low voice, "Tang Yu, I can't let Dad's life's work go to waste." Her little hand hung around his neck, and her voice became even softer. "I know you're doing this for my own good. I hope, but I have no other choice." She even lifted her head and kissed his chin. "Is that good?" Tang Yu looked down at her, his face expressionless. She was a little nervous. Pei Chi did not know what she was feeling at that moment. She had nothing left, and now she could only hold on tightly to Tang Yu, the only man who could give her warmth. She was like an injured little animal, despairing and lonely. Tang Yu's fingers gently stroked her long hair, and then he bent down. His handsome face was pressed against her cold little face, and his voice was hoarse. "Chi, why won't you let me help you?" She froze for a moment, then tightened her grip and pressed her face even closer to his chest. Then she said very softly, "Because I'm afraid I'll get used to it." Tang Yu did not say anything. These few nights, she could not sleep well at all, or rather, she did not sleep at all. Sometimes when he woke up and realized that she was not in his arms, he would put on his clothes and look for her. Often, she would hide in the washroom and just squat there, doing nothing, holding the music box in her hands. He remembered it was a gift from Pei Mingyi. She could sit there all night, holding that thing in a daze. He didn't force her because he could understand this feeling. He just carried her. "Chi, it's time to sleep." Pei Chi had developed a habit of hugging him and calling him daddy when she slept. This was a huge test for Tang Yu. He was a mature man, and he had his own desires. She was buried in his arms like this, and it was inevitable that he would want her, but she was so sad and called him daddy. How could he continue? Often it was he who kissed her, and then fiercely ordered her to sleep. In just a week, she had lost a lot of weight. Tang Yu caressed the little person in his arms. "Why are you afraid?" Pei Chi closed her eyes and didn't say anything. She just hugged him tightly. Tang Yu didn't know. He didn't know anything. She did not dare to let him know. She was full of sins, and every moment that she was with him, she was on tenterhooks. She had nothing to lose anymore. She was afraid of having something, because the feeling of losing it was too hopeless. Pei Chi moved her little face into his neck and bit his neck. "Tang Yu, don't be too good to me. Really, don't. I can't afford it." She had said this many times, but this time, she was in despair. Chapter 211. Pei Chi was a little shocked. She stared at him with her eyes wide open in disbelief. After a long while, she finally found her voice. "Tang Yu. You didn't say that. I said, get married if you're pregnant." His tone was very firm. He lifted her up, lifted her chin, and forced her to look at him with a burning gaze. Pei Chi's entire body was trembling slightly. She pursed her lips and said after a long while, "But I'm not pregnant." And she hadn't agreed to it either. Tang Yu's fingers tightened as he stared at her little face, not letting go of any expression on her face. After a long while, he said in a low voice, "Do you want me to make you pregnant now?" As he said that, he couldn't help but get excited. Pei Chi shifted her body uneasily, but he held her still again. "You're not allowed to escape." Pei Chi was at a loss. She couldn't look into his burning eyes, so she lowered her eyes and said softly, "Tang Yu, do you want to get married at 22, or get married now while you're pregnant?" He kindly gave her a choice. He knew that he was being a little hasty, but he didn't want to wait any longer. There were too many unpredictable things that could happen while he waited for her to grow up. Thus, he decided to make her his, Tang Yu's, exclusive. Pei Chi looked at him eagerly. If she didn't choose to get married at 22, would he get her pregnant now. But she didn't dare to agree. Pei Chi hugged him shamelessly, not saying a word. A tinge of disappointment flashed through Tang Yu's heart, but he still forced himself to say, "Looks like I have to choose for you." "No." Her little hands wrapped around his neck, and she said in a low voice, "Tang Yu, I need to think about it." He had already carried her and was walking towards the bedroom. Upon hearing that, he looked down at her and said hoarsely, "Think about it carefully then." She gasped and sank into the bed with him. At this critical moment, her little hands scrambled to the bedside table and took out a small box. Her voice trembled as she said, "Tang Yu, use this." He lowered his head and suddenly felt annoyed. He slapped the box away from her hand. Her little hands were suddenly grabbed and pinned to the two sides of the bed. His eyes stared at her, and the look in his eyes scared her. She couldn't help but close her eyes. Tang Yu bit her neck fiercely, as if he was venting his anger. He would only feel better when he saw her become a completely different person because of him. At the most intense moment, he buried his face in her neck and whispered, "Pei Chi, do you love me?" He had never felt so vulnerable when he asked. He, Tang Yu, such a high and mighty person, was begging a little girl for her love. After a long time, he did not receive any response. When he looked up, Pei Chi had already fainted. Her face was flushed red. Tang Yu reached out and pulled her into his arms. He hugged her carefully and gently patted her back, but she didn't know how gentle he was. Tang Yu looked at her beautiful little face and smiled bitterly. "If it was Jinrong or Chi, would you agree?" The next morning, when Pei Chi woke up, Tang Yu was no longer in bed. She sat up and reached out to rub her messy hair. She felt a little hungry. She didn't seem to have eaten anything last night. She only remembered. Chapter 2:12. She paused for a moment and realized that he didn't want to talk about it anymore. She heaved a sigh of relief and said quickly, "I have to go to school in the morning to settle the paperwork. I'll go to the company in the afternoon." Tang Yu looked at her and paused. "Okay, I'll go to work first." He bent down and kissed her on the lips. "Take care of yourself." Pei Chi looked at him and pursed her lips, not saying a word. Tang Yu smiled and reached out to stroke her hair. "Call me after work. I'll pick you up." Pei Chi looked at him and suddenly felt a little sad. No matter what, she couldn't avoid it. She wanted to make use of Tang Yu. It was like a dying man clutching at the last straw of hope. Tang Yu went to the company. Xiao Ran reported his schedule for the day and went out. Then Meng Qingqing came in. "Tang Yu, I heard that Pei Chi has taken over the pay group." Tang Yu looked at him. "You're very well informed." Meng Qingqing smiled. "Of course, I'm also concerned about Pei Chi." Tang Yu looked at him and Meng Qingqing immediately corrected himself. "It's Pei Chi." Tang Yu looked down at the document and nodded. Meng Qingqing didn't want to give up. He leaned over and said, "Are you really willing to let her go to such a messy place?" The business world was like a battlefield and it wasn't a fun place. Moreover, Pei Chi was a young girl. With her looks, she would definitely be eaten alive. Tang Yu thought for a moment, put down the document in his hand and looked at Meng Qingqing. "Go to the media and let them know that I'm interested in marrying Pei Chi." Meng Qingqing was stunned and looked at Tang Yu. "Are you serious?" Tang Yu frowned. "Since when did I like to joke around?" Meng Qingqing hurriedly said yes, but he still didn't understand. Tang Yu, why would he fall for a girl like Pei Chi? His appearance was top-notch, but his background was also top-notch complicated. Still not going. Tang Yu glared at him, and Meng Qingqing hurriedly scampered out. When the door closed, Tang Yu let out a long sigh of relief. Just as Qingqing had said, How could he bear to part with her? But what could he do even if he couldn't bear to part with her? That girl was extremely stubborn. If he didn't let her do it, their relationship would probably return to the freezing point. Tang Yu felt that he was patient and tolerant to her, but he didn't know if she could understand. When Xiao Ran came in, she saw that the president was a little upset. She walked over and placed a stack of documents in front of him. "President, there's a meeting to be held in a while." Tang Yu looked up at her and said, "Xiao Ran, go and gather some information about the pay group for me." Xiao Ran had a rough idea of what to do. He nodded and said, "I'll get it done right away." Tang Yu got up and left for the meeting. When he came back, there was a thick stack of documents in front of him. It was all about the pay group. He sat down and read it quietly. The more he read, the deeper his frown became. He remembered that a month ago, things weren't this bad. But now, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that the pay group was besieged on all sides. A company like this was handed over to Pei Chi-Chi. This wasn't doting. It was clearly a burden. Tang Yu was a little annoyed. He was annoyed with Pei Mingyi. After a long while, he made a call to the marketing department. "Manager Liang, if there's any suitable business in the near future, and the amount isn't large, within 100 million, please keep it for me." Tang Yu didn't want to throw money at Pei Chi-Chi. That wasn't what she wanted. He could only help her secretly. Chapter 213. Pei Chi-Chi went to the school to apply for a leave of absence. Principal Wang felt it was a pity that such a diamond from South Africa was going to disappear from the school. He tried to persuade her to stay. "Chi-Chi, this degree will always be reserved for you. You can come whenever you want, but it's better if it's early." After all, Pei Chi-Chi understood what Principal Wang meant. She pursed her lips and agreed in a low voice. When she walked out, she saw Lin Jinrong standing at the end of the long Kapok Avenue. He looked at her from afar and didn't approach her. He just stared at her like that. Pei Chi-Chi didn't move forward either. Too many things had happened in these few months. When she saw him again, it felt like a lifetime had passed. After a long time, Lin Jinrong disappeared. Pei Chi-Chi looked at him, tears welling up in her eyes. Next to her stood Qin Xinjie. "Pei Chi-Chi, if I were you, I would choose to rely on a man." Qin Xinjie tilted her head and looked at Pei Chi-Chi. "You know, you're stupid. Do you think you can support a company? Don't be ridiculous. In the end, you'll still be crying in Tang Yu's arms. Tang Yu will still be the one to clean up the mess." Pei Chi-Chi looked ahead and listened to her words. After a long time, she turned her head and looked at Qin Xinjie. They hadn't seen each other for a long time. Qin Xinjie was different from before. In the past, Qin Xinjie didn't pay much attention to her appearance. Now, she was dressed up nicely. Pei Chi-Chi looked at her and smiled. "What does that have to do with you?" Qin Xinjie was stunned. Then, she said unhappily, "Tang Yu will never marry you. Just thinking about you and Lin Jinrong is enough to make him feel bad." Pei Chi-Chi didn't say anything and walked straight ahead. She didn't care about these people. She only cared about Pei Mingyi, and that person. But that person was someone she couldn't afford to care about. With every step Pei Chi-Chi took, she felt like she was walking on the edge of fate's blade. She didn't know if she was a joke like Qin Xinjie said, but she wouldn't beg Tang Yu to help her. She would feel guilty. When she arrived at the pay group, she still had a headache looking at the documents that were particularly unfamiliar to her. The company was also a bit messy. Zhou Meilin never gave up and incited some of her old subordinates to make things difficult for Pei Chi-Chi. Secretary Xiaowen had actually blocked some, but she couldn't block all of them. During the meeting, Pei Chi was described as having a hard time. She didn't understand it at all. She walked out of the conference room. Although it was late autumn, her back was already drenched in cold sweat. The financial crisis of the Pei Corporation, a few major shareholders requested to withdraw their shares, and some orders were also cancelled by the buyers. Pei Chi couldn't solve these problems. Holding on to a thick stack of documents, Xiaowen looked at Pei Chi with a hint of sympathy in her eyes. Boss Pei must be having a headache. It's not easy for a young lady. However, she would rather follow Pei Chi than follow an old witch like Zhou Meilin. At most, she would just have to find a new job if the company collapsed. This was what Xiaowen secretly thought in her heart. Pei Chi sat in her office with a financial report in her hand. The Pei Corporation didn't have enough startup capital, not even 1 million yuan. On the days when Pei Mingyi passed away, Zhou Meilin used all kinds of excuses to empty the company again. Chapter 214. Boss Pei, if those shareholders want to withdraw their shares, the company would not be able to fork out that much money. If things get out of hand, things would get out of hand. Little Wen said worriedly. Pei Chi knew in her heart that this was all Zhou Meilin's ploy to make things difficult for her and make her give up on the company. Little Wen, let me think about it. Pei Chi smiled faintly and looked at the report again. Little Wen pursed her lips. All right then, Boss Pei. I'll head out first. Let me know if you need anything. Xiaowen walked out. Pei Chi stayed until 10 at night before returning. When she returned, she even carried a stack of documents. Tang Yu did not return home either. She opened the door and heaved a sigh of relief. She put down the things and ate something casually before starting to look at those documents again. Her mind was filled with nothing but money. Pei Chi didn't expect that one day, she would become so unscrupulous and realistic. Suddenly, she thought of King Entertainment. Perhaps she could, but when she thought of Tang Yu, Pei Chi hesitated for a moment. However, she made up her mind. Tang Yu had not returned when she went to bed. It was already 1 p.m. Tang Yu only returned after 2 p.m. Slightly tipsy, he did not take a shower immediately. Instead, he reached out to touch her on the bed. Chi had lost a lot of weight recently. He really could not bear to part with her. However, what could he do? This little girl was extremely stubborn. In his heart, he hoped that she would continue to study so that they could get married after she graduated. His fingers gently touched her little face. He smiled helplessly and walked into the bathroom to take a shower. When he came out, he was already refreshed. Looking at the shadow under her eyes, he could not bear to touch her. However, that did not include daybreak. When Pei Chi woke up, she saw Tang Yu's magnified handsome face. He had slept late but did not look tired at all. He was still extremely handsome. She had just opened her eyes when she was kissed. Then, her pajamas were lifted up, her little hand caught his big palm. Tang Yu. Morning's voice was still a little hoarse. Tang Yu didn't stop. He pressed her down and pressed his lips against her neck. What time did you come back last night? His voice was warm and he was occupying her. Pei Chi couldn't take it anymore. She raised her head and said, 10 o'clock. He paused for a moment and then stopped. He hovered above her and looked at her intently. After a long time, he said softly, Chi, I'll get the driver to pick you up every day, okay? You can't refuse. He whispered in her ear domineeringly. Pei Chi looked up at him, I'm worried. His fingers gently touched her little face, and then he did not let go of her. However, he was worried that both of them would have to go to work soon, so he decided to end this quickly, even if he was not satisfied. After breakfast, Tang Yu sent her to the office. When they got out of the car, Tang Yu suddenly held her little hand and handed her a check. The amount wasn't too big, just 20 million. It was just enough to solve the pay group's urgent need. He placed the check in her little hand. Chi-Chi, this is not a transaction. Pei Chi-Chi looked at him and pursed her lips into a straight line. She pinched the check and put it back in the cabinet. I don't need it now. I'll get it from you when I need it. Chapter 2:15. Pei Chi-Chi opened the car door and alighted. She had just entered the office when Little Wen told her a piece of good news. The business department received an order for about 80 million yuan this morning. According to the contract, we can earn more than 10 million yuan. Although it's not a big order, it's really good for now. Let me see. Pei Chi-Chi immediately reached out. Little Wen handed the document to her and pointed at it. It's a new product from Dreamy company, and we can pre-order the goods twice. This product is very popular now, and we don't have to worry about selling it. Many cell phone and electronic manufacturers are fighting for it. Little One thought for a moment and said, the shipment will be very fast. Boss Pei, this is a very good opportunity to build a good relationship with Dreamy company. It will bring us many opportunities in the future. She actually wanted to say something, but she swallowed her words. Obviously, Boss Pei did not know that Dreamy was a subsidiary of Xingyuan, and Little One cleverly decided not to tell her. Pei Chi-Chi looked at it for a long time before looking up at Little One. Is this reliable? Little One blinked. I think Dreamy has a good reputation, but if Boss Pei is not assured, you can go back and ask someone to take a look. She did not say who this person was. In any case, Boss Pei would know even if she did not say it. Pei Chi-Chi indeed understood. She closed the document. Then, I will think of a way to get the startup funds. Little One muttered in her heart. What else could she do? She just had to say something to Tang Yu. Pei Chi-Chi looked at her. What's my schedule in the afternoon? There's only one meeting in the afternoon, but it's not too important, Little One said immediately. Pei Chi-Chi thought for a moment. I'll go out in the afternoon. I won't be returning to the office. At King Entertainment, Qin Anlin sat in his office, holding a glass of red wine in his hand. The entire office was decorated in an artistic style. The colors were thick but dark. There was a knock on the door, and then his secretary entered. President Qin, a lady wants to see you. Every day, there were many women who wanted to see President Qin, but she never informed them. Today, it was because the girl who came was too beautiful, and didn't look like those women who pestered her. Qin Anlin put down the cup in his hand with an inscrutable expression on his face. That little mouse had finally arrived. The secretary was a little surprised. They let him in without asking. However, she still left immediately. After a while, she came back with Pei Chi-Chi. President Qin, I'll get you a cup of coffee. Qin Anlin nodded. After the door was closed, his eyes fell on Pei Chi-Chi's face. Have you made up your mind? As he spoke, he picked up a pack of cigarettes from the table and lit one up. He slowly took a puff and looked at her. Pei Chi-Chi stood and said, I want to know, what kind of advertisement and how much is it paid? Qin Anlin smiled and the corners of his mouth curled up. For a newcomer, it's usually only about 500,000 yuan. But if there's a nude scene, it'll be 1 million. I want 20 million. Pei Chi-Chi was expressionless. Qin Anlin's fingers, which were holding the cigarette butt, trembled. Then he paused and looked up at her. His expression seemed to think that she had gone crazy. Even an A-list international movie queen might not have such a price. Chapter 216. Qin Anlin leaned back against the back of the leather chair. He re-examined the young girl in front of him. There was a rare perseverance in her eyes. It seems that you really need money. He put out the cigarette. Why don't you ask Tang Yu for it? You're actually spending Tang Yu's money in this way. Pei Chi looked down and her long eyelashes fluttered. After a long while, she chuckled and said, maybe it's for peace of mind. Qin Anlin's expression changed slightly. He stared at that small face that could topple cities, and only then did he spit out one sentence at a time. You've fallen in love with him, haven't you? Pei Chi looked up. He thought he would see panic or embarrassment in her eyes, but she didn't. She just smiled and said, President Qin, I can tell you the answer if you sign the contract with me. What if I don't want to know? Qin Anlin sneered and reached out to pinch her chin. It was probably a habit because he always treated the women around him like this, except of course, Shen Lian. Pei Chi dodged. Qin Anlin retracted his hand and looked at the girl in front of him quietly. He seemed to understand why Tang Yu was interested in her. She was indeed a difficult girl to deal with. After a long time, he smiled and said, okay. He opened the drawer and took out a contract and handed it to her. Take a look. If there's no problem, you can sign it. The advance payment is 50%. Pei Chi took a look and saw that it was an international skincare brand. It was a very famous brand, and the representative company in Asia-Pacific was Jin Taihe of the Shen family. She looked up at Qin Anlin and asked, I want to ask, do you need the dew? Qin Anlin smiled and said, this is an international brand. For the sake of their own image, they won't have too much dew. Pei Chi knew in her heart that there wouldn't be too much, but there would still be some. As for the purpose, Pei Chi was also clear. If such a commercial was filmed and there were nude scenes, Tang Yu would probably skin her alive. At this moment she hesitated, but only for a few seconds. After reading the contract carefully and confirming that there were no problems, she signed her name on it. The liquidated damages are 200 million. Qin Anlin pressed down the pages and gave her one last chance. Pei Chi lowered her head. I know, but I also have a condition. He slowly raised his eyes. The scale requires my approval. Add this to the list. Otherwise, I'll tear it up right now. Qin Anlin smiled slowly. Of course you can. King is a legitimate company. We won't do anything that goes against the contract for personal reasons. Pei Chi let go. Qin Anlin took out his checkbook and wrote a check for 10 million. He said mildly, the shoot will take about 2 days next week. There's no need for outdoor scenes. It'll all be done in the studio. Of course, the person in charge of Jin Taihe will also come. He paused. You know her, Shen Lian. Is that okay? Pei Chi only pursed her lips and didn't say anything. Qin Anlin's gaze deepened. Are you like this when you're with Tang Yu? You don't please him. Tang Yu was a difficult person to please. Qin Anlin knew this all too well. Chapter 217. Pei Chi was stunned for a moment. He doesn't like people trying to please him. Usually, he was the one who made her happy. Even in bed, it seemed that way. Although Pei Chi had only said a short sentence, the amount of information was too much. Even Qin Anlin choked on the smoke. He choked for a long time. He looked up at Pei Chi. Pei Chi had already taken the check and left. He didn't know why, but he thought that perhaps one day, the little girl that Tang Yu doted on 1,000 times would also leave Tang Yu in the end. The door closed. Shen Lian walked out of the lounge. She looked at Qin Anlin and asked, you signed it. Qin Anlin didn't say a word. He just threw the contract in his hand at her. Shen Lian held the contract and sneered, I overestimated her. She's no different from those gold-digging women. She's willing to strip for 20 million. Qin Anlin leaned back in his chair. His long legs were on the edge of his desk. He took a deep drag of his cigarette and looked at Shen Lian. If she strips in front of Tang Yu, I think Tang Yu would be willing to give her 1 billion for one night. Shen Lian was a little annoyed. Qin Anlin. He wasn't moved. He held the contract and said, Shen Lian, this is King Entertainment. I'm in charge of the artists I sign. She won't break the rules. Because Pei Chi was someone he had his eyes on. She was a pearl that he had his eyes on. Given time, she would definitely shine brightly. He wouldn't allow her to have any scandals. Shen Lian was stunned. She had thought that Qin Anlin was trying so hard to sign Pei Chi because of her. But now, it was obvious that wasn't the case. Anlin, give her to me. Shen Lian's hands were placed on the desk opposite him. She was wearing a suit, and as she bent down, he could see everything clearly. Qin Anlin looked at her quietly. He knew that she was seducing him. She had used this trick a few years ago. Qin Anlin sat there without batting an eyelid, allowing her to unbutton his shirt. When she sat in his arms and tried to kiss his chin, Qin Anlin held her sharp chin and said coldly, I'm not drunk now, and I'm not Tang Yu. With that, he pushed her away, straightened his clothes, and turned around to look at Shen Lian, who was in a sorry state. Did you know? There are several types of women. One is what I want, one is what I hate, and one is a commodity. Right now, to him, Pei Chi was a commodity, and a top-notch commodity at that. Shen Lian was the kind of woman that he wanted and hated at the same time. His body wanted her, but his heart rejected her, and even hated her. A woman who had someone else in her heart would offer her body for that man. To him, it was an insult. Anlin, you don't want me? Shen Lian's arms were around his neck, and her body was close to his. Her voice was soft and charming. She was really beautiful, the kind of cold beauty, the kind that gave people a sense of coldness. Qin Anlin looked at her, with one hand holding her waist and the other pressing the intercom. His voice was cold and ruthless. Jessica, call all the newcomers to my office, to audition. Shen Lian was stunned. Qin Anlin, you'd rather have them than me. Shen Lian gritted her teeth. He grunted and still held her. Do you want to put on your clothes first? It's very air-conditioned here. Chapter 218. The newcomer was very young, very beautiful, and most importantly, obedient and tactful. Knowing that she was here for an audition, she walked over obediently and started kissing Qin Anlin. Jessica tactfully went out. He was the manager of a group of newcomers. Qin Anlin carried the girl called Xiaoyan onto his desk. As he kissed her, he pulled down her zipper, without a care for Shen Lian's presence. Shen Lian just stood there, feeling indescribably embarrassed. At that moment, it was as if she had returned to the past. She wanted Tang Yu, but Tang Yu couldn't touch her. Now, Qin Anlin was touching someone else in front of her. Qin Anlin, are you crazy? Shen Lian had always been proud. She had never imagined that one day, Qin Anlin would treat her like this. Didn't he love her very much? So much that he would do anything for her. Qin Anlin looked up from the woman's embrace. His gaze was a little cold. You think that just because I slept with you once, I have to listen to you? Shen Lian, you've underestimated me and overestimated yourself. He had asked for that girl called Xiaoyan right in front of her. That girl was very sensible. At first, she had come for him, but later, she had taken the initiative to serve Qin Anlin. The scene was explosive. Shen Lian just stood there. She wrapped her jacket tightly around herself, unwilling to watch or listen, but those voices kept drilling into her ears. She couldn't hide even if she wanted to. Half an hour later, Qin Anlin zipped up his own zipper. He was already neat and tidy. He patted Xiaoyan and wrote her a check. Xiaoyan was also sensible. She took the check and walked out. Serving President Qin once was an open secret in King. But this was only known within the small circle of King Entertainment. However, this kind of thing was only known within the small circle of King Entertainment. Outside, no one would know, much less dare to say a word about it. Moreover, Qin Anlin had a habit. When a small star became a hot star, he would not touch it anymore. The people he had met were all rookies. So in King, it was called an audition, but it was just an audition in bed. After the girl left, Qin Anlin looked at Shen Lian and straightened his tie calmly. Did you see that? To me, women are just a passageway, and you are just a little more expensive. He had directly pierced through her beautiful dream and made her no longer think that Qin Anlin was still the man who would let her do whatever she wanted and silently guard behind her. He took out a cigarette and lit it. His voice was a little hoarse. Shen Lian, actually, after we did it that time, we could have been very happy. But, you and I, neither of us is the other's salvation. Never. Not in the past, not in the future. What about Pei Chi-Chi? Are you going to touch her? Ever since she was young, Shen Lian had only cried for Tang Yu. She was as proud as a little princess. But today, Qin Anlin had done it. He had smashed her pride and dignity to the ground and stomped on it. Qin Anlin laughed. He looked at her with a cold gaze. I've said it before. She is an expensive commodity. And I will never touch Tang Yu's woman again. But Qin Anlin had never thought that one day, he would fall in love with his commodity. He loved her so much that he was willing to give up everything for her. Bastard! Shen Lian glared at him and finally walked out. Chapter 219. After a long time, he picked up Pei Chi-Chi's contract and made a call to Jessica. Spread the word that King has found the most suitable candidate for this season's advertisement. It's a newcomer. I want to be on the headlines for 3 days in a row. Jessica was a little worried. President Qin, wouldn't that be too much exposure? It's not good for an artist's development. Let's do that. Qin Anlin had already made up his mind and hung up. It was already evening when Pei Chi-Chi walked out of King's building. She went to the bank and transferred the money to the Pei Corporation's account. Because of Jia Mei's order and the transfer of a sum of money, the shareholders who wanted to withdraw their shares had renewed hope and started to doubt Zhou Meilin's words. After all, Boss Pei was backed by Tang Yu, the CEO of Xingyuan. He could save the Pei Corporation with just a piece of skin. Should they wait and see? Pei Chi-Chi called for a meeting to temporarily appease them. Little Wen said as she walked out of the conference room, Boss Pei is getting more and more into the situation. Those two people have been in the company for many years. They are not good people. They are in cahoots with Zhou Meilin. They must have realized that Boss Pei has the ability to revive the company. That's why they relented. Pei Chi-Chi walked into her office and slumped against the back of her chair. She swayed gently and laughed bitterly. How can it be that easy? Little Wen, I'm very tired after these few days. Little Wen's voice became gentler. You have to rest well. Don't force yourself. I don't want to, but Zhou Meilin has been forcing me. If I make any mistakes, she will incite the shareholders to sell their shares. She picked up a pen and drew on a piece of paper. Little one, sort out the company's accounts for the past year and give them to me. Little one understood what she meant the moment she heard that. She could not help but be stunned. She looked at Pei Chi hesitantly. After all, it's still. She did not finish her sentence, but Pei Chi understood. Do as I say. Pei Chi's pen paused and she scratched hard on the paper. Zhou Meilin had sold her out and angered her father. She had transferred a large amount of money from the company behind her father's back. Wasn't it reasonable for her to go to jail? Little Wen's gaze deepened. Perhaps as she had underestimated Boss Pei previously. Boss Pei was nothing like a 20-year-old girl. When it was necessary, she would be more ruthless than anyone else. After she left, Pei Chi sat in her office for a long time before she was ready to go back. The chauffeur was already waiting for her downstairs. It was a black Audi. Tang Yu had yet to return home after arriving at Xia City. Tang Yu did not go home even though he had returned. Pei Chi vaguely felt his emotions in her heart, but she did not delve into it. She walked into the bathroom and took a shower. When she came out, she was a little annoyed. Pei Chi could vaguely feel his emotions. However, she did not dwell on it. She walked into the bathroom and took a shower. When she came out, she felt vexed. That kind of hatred seeped into her bones. She wished that she could send Zhou Meilin to jail until she died of old age. Pei Chi's gaze landed on the cigarette box that Tang Yu had placed on the table. She looked at it for a long time. Then, she walked over and picked up the cigarette box and lighter. She sat on the toilet and imitated him. She picked up a cigarette and lit it with the lighter. She just looked at it. Then, she carefully brought it closer to her mouth and took a puff. She choked and coughed so hard that tears almost rolled down her cheeks. Chapter 220. Tang Yu looked at his little pet in shock. She was smoking. And she was smoking his cigarette. As she coughed, she brought the cigarette closer to her mouth. That intoxicated expression made him want to give her a good spanking. With that thought in mind, he did it. Pei Chi was shocked. She raised her eyes, and there was still a trace of moisture in her eyes as she stared at him. You've grown up. You smoked. Tang Yu undid his tie and stepped into the bathroom, closing the door behind him. Pei Chi sat there, not daring to move an inch. She was still holding the pitiful cigarette in her hand. The cigarette indicated that it was innocent. Tang Yu sat on the edge of the bathtub opposite her. His long legs were stretched out comfortably, almost reaching her feet. His dark eyes were locked on her eyes, not letting go of any expression on her face. She was stunned for a long time. Suddenly, she pressed the cigarette butt into the ashtray. She looked at him pitifully. There was no more. Tang Yu smiled faintly and took the cigarette box. He lit one and took a puff. Do you want to smoke? Pei Chi did not say a word. She just looked at the red cigarette butt. Her gaze was pure and somewhat sexy, innocent and seductive. He held the cigarette in his hand and looked at her with a hint of encouragement in his dark eyes, so sinister. She mustered up her courage and got up. She half knelt in front of him and moved closer to him. Her long black hair was scattered behind her. She was only wearing a white silk pajamas with a loose strap. As she was half kneeling, he could even see the side of her body. His eyes were dark as he looked at her attentively. The Pei Chi at this moment was poisonous, the ultimate killer of men. No man could remain indifferent when looking at her like this, unless he was a eunuch. She finally moved closer to him and took a puff of the cigarette. This time, she did not choke on it. Tang Yu looked at her and narrowed his eyes. Very easy to draw, isn't it? Tang Yu sneered. By the time Pei Chi was alerted, it was already too late. He quickly put the cigarette butt on his lips, grabbed her wrist with one hand, and pulled off his tie with the other. He quickly tied her hands behind her back. This posture was extremely enchanting, as if she was offering herself to him. He looked down at her. Just stay here and reflect on yourself. As he spoke, he took off his clothes and went to take a shower, leaving Pei Chi by the side of the toilet. Tang Yu. It was very uncomfortable for her to be tied up like this, and what was even more hateful was that he made her kneel there. That would be too embarrassing, and my knee would hurt. She called out to him for a long time, but he ignored her and continued to take his bath. When Tang Yu came out, Pei Chi stopped screaming. She was half kneeling and half sitting on the ground. Her forehead was covered with a thin layer of sweat, and her thin pajamas were stuck to her body because of the sweat. How dare you smoke? This punishment was considered light. When she saw him coming out, she meowed like a kitten. Tang Yu. Her voice was dry and full of pitiful energy. Tang Yu looked at her and sneered. Do you know that you're wrong? She nodded her head vigorously, and her voice was still like that of a kitten. Can you let me go? Tang Yu walked over, picked her up, and untied her. Go take a shower. You stink. Chapter 221. She returned to the bedroom. The lights were a little dim and Tang Yu was leaning against the headboard, his gaze deep. Pei Chi-Chi's heart skipped a beat. She pulled her bathrobe, carefully lifted the blanket and lay down beside him. Tang Yu tilted his head to look at her. Her little body had burrowed under the blanket and was wriggling slowly, like a caterpillar. He did not move but quietly took out a cigarette from the bedside and lit it, but the next second, the cigarette in his hand almost burned him. Damn it, that little rascal, she actually knew. He had never thought that Pei Chi would take the initiative to do such a thing for him. Although he had forced her that time, forcing and loving each other were two different feelings. She had hurt him, but that kind of pain was different from normal pain. He let out a muffled groan in embarrassment. Unable to restrain himself, he pulled her long hair, pulled her out from under the blanket and kissed her. Pei Chi, you've become naughty. She obediently let him kiss her and let him take off her pajamas. After a passionate kiss, she lay in his arms. Tang Yu placed one hand on her back to comfort her. He held a cigarette in his other hand and smoked slowly. Recently, he had gotten into the habit of smoking after bed. After smoking this cigarette, he prepared to take a shower and sleep. Pei Chi half propped herself up and looked at the cigarette in his hand. Tang Yu looked at her. You want to smoke? She did not speak and only looked at him. That kind of gaze, he couldn't wait to kill her again. Tang Yu placed the cigarette in front of her mouth. Just once. Pei Chi held the cigarette and took 2 careful puffs. She did not dare to smoke anymore. Tang Yu took the cigarette and extinguished it in a practiced and elegant manner. Then he carried her to the bathroom. She was kissed. Chi, you've enjoyed it. Now it's my turn. So, the cigarette was not for nothing. That night, he did it particularly incisively and vividly, almost beatifying himself. When Pei Chi went to work the next day, her entire body was still sore. She was a little sleepy, so she got Xiao Wen to make 2 cups of coffee. Just as she was looking at the accounts that Xiao Wen sent over, the door was pushed open with a bang. Xiao Wen followed behind and wanted to enter, but Zhou Meilin had already closed the door and locked it. Pei Chi looked up at Zhou Meilin. What are you doing here? Zhou Meilin looked thinner, and her face was a little yellow. Compared to before, her spirit was a lot worse. She glared at Pei Chi, her eyeballs almost popping out. Pei Chi, what are you trying to do? Do you want to sue me for company matters? Pei Chi wasn't surprised that she knew that Little Wen had transferred the bills from the accounts department. What surprised her was that Zhou Meilin had come over so quickly. She was still sitting there with a calm expression. "Auntie, it's good that you know it. You and I both know why the Pei family ended up like this." She picked up the accounts in her hands. "These are enough to sue you until you die of old age in prison." Zhou Meilin lunged forward, snatched the papers and tore them into pieces. "Dream on. The company belongs to your father. If he dies, it will be mine. I've touched my own money, what can you do to me? Pei Chi, you're a bastard. I should have strangled you to death back then." Chapter 222. Zhou Meilin glared at her, wishing she could tear her apart. Pei Chi lifted her chin slightly. "Auntie, do you know what's the stupidest thing about you?" Zhou Meilin remained silent. "When you were with that pretty boy, Rong Lei, did you believe that he would love you? Auntie, don't you have a mirror at home? Do you think anyone would love you with that face of yours?" Pei Chi sneered at Zhou Meilin. "Dad is good to you, but you turn a blind eye to it. Instead, you trust a man who lives off a woman." Yes, Pei Mingyi might have been obsessed with Zhao Ku, but if he didn't care about Zhou Meilin, he wouldn't have tolerated her for so many years, and he wouldn't have indulged her again and again, but Zhou Meilin had never looked at it seriously. Zhou Meilin paused for a moment before regaining her composure. "Don't give me that. Pei Chi, don't think that you can do anything with the Pei Corporation. Don't think that you can marry into the Tang family. I know." Pei Chi sneered and stared into her eyes. "Zhao Ku, right? Auntie, do you think I don't know?" Zhou Meilin's heart trembled. This damned girl actually knew. "It's not up to me whether I can get married or not, but it's up to me whether I can go to jail or not. Bitch, I'll strangle you to death." Zhou Meilin's sharp voice rang out as she pounced towards Pei Chi. At this moment, Xiaowen had already asked someone from the security office to rush over and pull Zhou Meilin away with all her might. Zhou Meilin was held up like a madwoman. Her head was full of sweat, and her hair stuck to her forehead. She was in a sorry state. A trace of blood appeared on Pei Chi's neck. She stood up straight and pursed her lips as she looked at Zhou Meilin. She sneered and said to the security guard beside her, "Take the video and hand it over to the police station. Let her stay in there for a few days." This was also to let the shareholders know what would happen if they followed a mad dog. Little Wen's heart skipped a beat as she looked at Pei Chi. How was this the little girl she had seen in the beginning? The hatred in her eyes was enough to burn 10 Zhou Meilins. Zhou Meilin was still screaming, but no matter how much she screamed, there was no way she could stop fate. After everything calmed down, Little Wen's voice was very soft. "Boss Pei, the meeting is about to begin." Pei Chi nodded and stood up. Little Wen followed behind. No matter how she looked at it, she felt that Boss Pei was no longer the 20-year-old girl from back then. During the meeting, Pei Chi calmly introduced the middle-aged man to the shareholders and senior management. "This is Lawyer Deng, the new chief lawyer of the Pei Corporation. Zhou Meilin has been using the trust of the former boss Pei to steal a large amount of cash from the company for the past year. She has filed a complaint against us. I hope that the accounting department will cooperate." "Of course, you can choose not to cooperate," among the whispers below. "Zhou Meilin has been arrested." Pei Chi's face was expressionless. "She is suspected of assault." Manager Li of the accounting department wiped his sweat, but he remained silent. His heart was as clear as a mirror. Pei Chi's words were obviously directed at him. She wanted him to be her witness. However, how could he believe her? He had watched this young lady coldly for the past few days. In just half a month, he could tell that she was vicious and merciless. Her style was completely different from Pei Mingyi's. If he testified against Zhou Meilin today, he did not know if he would have to wait for death like Zhou Meilin tomorrow. Thus, Manager Li was still observing. What's more, he knew in his heart that without his evidence, there would not be any results in this lawsuit. Chapter 223. Before Pei Qiqi could get off work, Pei Huan rushed over with Xiao Wen following behind her. She could no longer work as a secretary. She was attacked twice in a day. Pei Huan's belly could already be seen. She held her belly with one hand and walked to Pei Qiqi. She raised her hand and was about to slap her. One of his hands grabbed hers and pulled it back forcefully, raising it high in the air. Pei Huan was a little stunned. She stared at Pei Qiqi's face. Pei Huan, do you think I'm still that bastard that you can hit whenever you want? Pei Qiqi sneered and threw her hand away. Or do you want to go to the police station to reunite with Auntie? Pei Huan stared at her eyes. Pei Qiqi, you're so vicious. Pei Qiqi chuckled. Compared to you and your mother, I don't think I'm even 1/10 as good as you. Pei Huan pursed her lips. Her eyes were a little timid. After a long while, she said, Dad passed away on his own. My mom didn't mistreat him. Pei Qiqi walked back to her desk. Yes, Auntie didn't do anything to Dad. She just sold me and told Dad about it. She looked at Pei Huan's angry face and suddenly smiled. Aren't you curious why I could get the Pei group so easily? Didn't Auntie tell you the reason? Pei Qiqi's expression was a little evil. At this moment, Pei Huan was like a little lamb in front of her. Pei Huan didn't say anything, but her breathing was a little messy and her face was a little red. Because your good mother raised a gigolo. Pei Qiqi told her very kindly. You're lying. Pei Huan's voice was a little harsh. Her body was also trembling. She didn't believe it. She didn't believe it. How could Mom betray Dad? This was impossible. You can ask Auntie yourself if she did. But now, Pei Huan, if I were you, I would take good care of my belly. After all, without this child, you really have nothing. Pei Qiqi sneered. As for Auntie, I really want some peace and quiet for a few days. I can only invite her to stay there for a few days. Pei Huan glared at her. Pei Qiqi, my mom was right. You're an ingrate. Dogs that bite usually don't bark. Little Wen, who was at the side, wanted to say something. How could this person scold people like that? Pei Qiqi raised her hand to stop Xiao Wen. She stood up and was one table away from Pei Huan. Her voice was very soft. So, I want to thank Auntie for raising this dog. I will repay her, for raising me. Pei Huan's heart was trembling. Such a Pei Qiqi had far exceeded her expectations. No, she was not Pei Qiqi. She was a demon, a blackened demon. Scram. Before I call security, I can't guarantee that they won't be as tactful as me. Pei Qiqi slowly sat down. Pei Huan was so angry that her lips were trembling. Pei Qiqi, you'll regret it. One day, I'll return everything you've done to me to you. No, double it. Let's encourage each other. Pei Qiqi curled her lips. Xiao Wen, send Mrs. Lin out. Be careful. She's pregnant with a dragon seed. It won't be good if she relies on you. Xiao Wen came over to invite Pei Huan. Pei Huan's lips trembled for a long time without moving. Finally, Pei Huan left, bringing with her a monstrous hatred. Xiao Wen looked at Pei Qiqi. At that moment, she saw boundless loneliness in Pei Qiqi. That was the loneliness of carrying too many things. Chapter 224. Pei Chi called out to Xiao Wen as she retreated. Xiao Wen, with the evidence we have now, we can't sue Zhou Meilin. I was just trying to scare her. Pei Chi smiled gently. Dad isn't here and we don't have any witnesses. Even if Dad was here, he would probably let her off for the sake of our marriage. Xiao Wen did not say anything. At a time like this, it was best not to say anything. Sort out Jiamei's order. That's our only hope now. Pei Chi stood up. From tomorrow onwards, I won't be coming to the office for 3 days. Call me if you need anything. Xiao Wen nodded. When Pei Chi arrived at the studio early in the morning, she was surprised to see that the makeup artist was Ning Jia. She was the one who styled Pei Huan at her wedding. Miss Pei. Ning Jia was also surprised to see Pei Chi. She looked at her for a while before asking softly, "How are you and Mr. Tang?" Pei Chi nodded, "We're fine. Mr. Tang is a sentimental person." Ning Jia hinted, "Mr. Tang doesn't know, right?" Pei Chi pursed her lips and did not say anything. What else did Ning Jia not know? The young lady had come here secretly. Ning Jia had been in this industry for a long time and she was good at reading people's minds. It had only been a few months since she last saw Pei Chi, but she felt that she saw something different about her. Ning Jia did not say much. "Try on the makeup." Pei Chi acknowledged and sat down. Ning Jia began to do her makeup. An hour later, Pei Chi couldn't help but ask, "Isn't it a little too thick? You'll look good on camera. Trust me, this is already considered light makeup." Ning Jia smiled, "Don't look at the beauties on TV or in movies. Their faces are actually covered with a thick layer of makeup." Pei Chi had the best foundation she had ever applied. After Ning Jia helped her with her foundation, she put on some color makeup. "See, it's good to be young." Ning Jia looked at the information on the table beside her. "For hair, the product requires straight black hair, so you don't need to touch it. It's fine as it is." He picked a white dress for Pei Chi. It was very pure, but it was a spaghetti style, so it had a touch of sexiness in its purity. The interior of the studio was a bathroom, and the theme of the commercial was lover. To put it bluntly, the female lead would rub skincare products on her body, and then let the male lead kiss it off bit by bit. Finally, they would kiss, simple and crude. Pei Chi's gaze landed on the male lead's name. Wu Haoji, one of the most popular actors in the country. Many female celebrities wanted to work with him, not because he was famous, but because he was super handsome. Am I handsome? Pei Chi looked at the photo and secretly thought that Tang Yu was much more handsome than him. Just the thought of Wu Haoji kissing her from her feet all the way to her knees made her hair stand on end. Would Tang Yu kill her when it was broadcasted on television? He would. Pei Chi waited for a full 3 hours. It was already noon, but he still hadn't arrived. Wu Haoji was a big shot celebrity, but he wasn't a part of King, so he was late. Let's audition first. Ning Jia was already used to situations like this, so she called out to the cameraman. Chapter 225. Pei Chi chuckled. "I know, it's as long as his name." Just as she said that, a voice rang out from behind her. It was gentle and seductive. "Is that so? Including certain places, it's the same length." That voice rang out right beside her ear, and a scorching breath blew behind her ear, one of the most sensitive areas of a woman. Pei Chi did not move. Her instincts told her that this was that, very long. Wu Haoji. Slowly turning his head, he saw a very handsome man about 23 or 24 years old. He was young and successful, so the words, "Little Heavenly King," were written on his face. Pei Chi did not say anything, but Wu Haoji was a little surprised. The reason why he was so late today was to express his dissatisfaction. This advertisement was an international brand, but someone of his status had to sleep with a newcomer. He had protested, but the higher-ups had completely ignored his opinion. All right, since they were ignoring him, he would just slack off. But he had not expected that the newcomer would be so beautiful. Seriously, he had seen all kinds of women in the entertainment industry. Half of the A-list and B-list actresses had slept with him, and there were many who were beautiful, but there were only a few who could be considered beautiful. And the girl in front of him was really the kind that only appeared once in 100 years. Wu Haoji was a little stunned. His eyes were fixed on Pei Chi's eyes. After a long time, he asked softly, "Do you want to measure it?" His hand held her fingers, hinting. Pei Chi had been following Tang Yu for a long time, and she actually understood what he meant. She did not retract her hand, but looked back at him and smiled faintly. "I prefer official data." Wu Haoji stared at her for a long time, and then let go of her lazily. He did not force her. "You will regret it." So many women wanted to sleep with him, but this woman rejected him directly. She must not have realized how handsome he was. Just then, Shen Lian walked in, followed by 2 secretaries, looking very imposing. Shen Lian's gaze landed on Pei Chi. In that instant, she was a little stunned. Pure and seductive. Ji Yi's eyes were already glued to Pei Chi. Shen Lian slapped the document in Wu Hao's hand. "Ziyi, have you never seen a woman before?" Her tone revealed her closeness to Wu Haoji, as well as her contempt for Pei Chi. Pei Chi thought to herself that in Shen Lian's heart, people outside of her circle were all lowly creatures. She was also not interested in talking to Shen Lian. Pei Chi was not used to being treated coldly. After Shen Lian finished talking to the male lead, she seemed to have noticed Pei Chi and coughed. "Who's this? Why don't you have any manners?" Her assistant was in a difficult position. She looked at Pei Chi, hinting with her eyes that she should say something soft. Pei Chi lowered her head and tidied up her dress. She did not make a sound, as if she had not heard Shen Lian's words. Shen Lian's expression changed, and her voice became a little harsh. "Pei Chi, did you hear what I said to you?" The moment she said that, the surroundings fell silent. Pei Chi looked up at her and said very slowly, "Don't you know who I am?" Shen Lian looked as if she had been slapped in the face, and her expression became even uglier. Just as she was about to flare up, Wu Haoji reached out and held her shoulder. "That's enough, sister. Anger will make you age faster." Chapter 226. But Wu Haoji and Shen Lian's surnames were different, so they were relatives. Pei Chi lowered her eyes and smiled faintly. She didn't really mind. Filming was originally supposed to start in the morning, but because the male lead was absent, it was delayed until the afternoon. When the director saw Pei Chi, he was very satisfied and patiently guided her on how to show off her feminine beauty. Wu Haoji lazily leaned on the side and watched as Pei Chi, who was wearing a white dress, slowly pulled up the hem of her dress. Her slender white fingers gently caressed that fair and tender skin. Her gaze was lowered and very focused. At this moment, she was quiet and beautiful like a moving painting. Wu Haoji squinted his eyes as he watched her long hair spread across her shoulders and back. He had been in the industry for a few years and had become very popular. But he was actually quite impatient with women. Most of the female celebrities that he worked with wanted to create hype with him. Even a small advertisement would make it seem like they had slept together. Over time, he became a little annoyed. But, at this moment, he really wanted to take the initiative to step forward and kiss Pei Chi. For those scenes, he hoped the director would make a few NGs so he could kiss her continuously. The director was extremely satisfied with Pei Chi-Chi's performance just now. Beautiful. Truly beautiful. This girl's beauty wasn't delicate, innocent, or cold. Instead, it was the kind where many qualities were mixed together to become one of a kind. While Pei Chi-Chi was touching up her makeup, Wu Haoji walked over and looked at her delicate face. He smiled, "I hope I can kiss you later." Fake. Pei Chi-Chi replied simply, not wanting to pay attention to him. Wu Haoji licked his lips and had an evil smile on his face. "I promise, it will be asterisk asterisk asterisk." Pei Chi-Chi was disgusted. Ning Jia glanced at Wu Haoji. Chi-Chi is Mr. Tang's woman. Wu Haoji knew Ning Jia. In the entertainment industry, Ning Jia had quite a bit of influence. But, she said, "Mr. Tang." Tang Yu. Wu Haoji was shocked. His cousin actually invited her love rival to film a commercial with her. Just how strong was his heart? Ning Jia did not respond. She simply sighed. It seemed she had no choice but to tell Mr. Tang. Otherwise, if something happened, she wouldn't be able to take responsibility. As they walked out, Ning Jia went outside to make a phone call. The director was explaining the scene to the male and female leads when Wu Haoji suddenly said, "In order to make it more realistic, I suggest a real kiss." "Of course, I won't stick out my tongue." The director thought about it for a moment and agreed. After all, Pei Chi-Chi and Ji Yi were both very good-looking, and it would be unnatural if they were to fake their positions. If they were a couple, they would definitely attract a lot of fans. This advertisement would also be a great success. This was out of consideration of profits. But the director did not know that this was completely Wu Hao's selfish intention. He just wanted to kiss Pei Chi-Chi 365 degrees. He said that he would not stretch out, and he would not stretch out. Pei Chi-Chi pursed her lips. "I don't want to." Shen Lian reminded her coldly, "Miss Pei, you signed a contract." "I'm sorry, I only signed a contract with King, not with your company." Pei Chi-Chi did not give in. Kissing someone else for real. Did she not want to live anymore? Shen Lian was quite domineering. "Then I'll call Qin Anlin." Chapter 227. As she spoke, a faint voice came from the doorway. "You don't have to call. I'm here." Shen Lian froze for a moment. She saw Qin Anlin standing at the doorway with one hand in his pocket and the other holding an unlit cigarette. He looked deeply at Pei Chi-Chi. "Miss Pei, from now on, you don't need to film this commercial anymore." Pei Chi-Chi was stunned. He pointed at the doorway. "Tang Yu is outside. Explain it to him." With that, he smiled faintly. "I have to thank Miss Pei for helping King generate 180 million in less than a day. Even an A-list actress can't do that. What a South African diamond." "You called Tang Yu." Pei Chi-Chi's voice sounded a little hoarse. Qin Anlin smiled. "I had planned to do that, but someone brought it forward." At first, he had wanted to see her, potential after the film was done. But now, Tang Yu had found out in just half a day. 200 million to redeem Pei Chi-Chi's contract. Qin Anlin walked over and took the camera from the cameraman's hands. Then he placed it in Pei Chi-Chi's hands. "This is yours. Explain it well." Qin Anlin even patted her shoulder and whispered in her ear, "When Tang Yu is angry, he won't go easy on him. Have you tried it?" How could Pei Chi-Chi not have tried it? She looked at the camera in her hands and gulped. "Hurry up and go," Qin Anlin said sympathetically. Then he looked up at Shen Lian. "I'm sorry." We might have to change the female lead. Qin Anlin. Are you messing with me? Shen Lian gritted her teeth. Qin Anlin lowered his gaze and smiled lightly. He looked up and said, Shen Lian, why would I mess with you? You've been playing me all along, haven't you? Including the day she seduced him in his office. For the sake of Tang Yu, she could sleep with Qin Anlin again and again. Didn't she think she was dirty? Qin Anlin turned around and walked out, passing Pei Chi-Chi. When he passed Pei Chi-Chi called out to him. He paused, and Pei Chi-Chi threw the camera at him. It grazed his forehead and fell to the ground, breaking into pieces. At first, Wu Haozhi was a little disappointed, but at this time, no one dared to treat Qin Anlin like that. Who would dare to do that to the CEO of King Entertainment? However, if it was Tang Yu's little pet, it would really dare. Blood seeped out of Qin Anlin's forehead. He reached out to wipe it away and frowned at Pei Chi-Chi. You have such a bad temper. Yes. Pei Chi-Chi looked at him. She was sure that this was a trap he had set up from the beginning. Qin Anlin said in a low voice, It's not a good habit to fly into a rage out of humiliation. He walked out in a straight line. He had told himself that all women were either a way to vent or a commodity. He didn't want to fall in love with anyone again, including Pei Chi-Chi. Pei Chi-Chi stood there for a long time before walking towards the door. When she reached the door, Qin Anlin's car drove away. There was also a white Bugatti Veyron at the door. That was Tang Yu's car. The car window was open. Tang Yu sat in the car smoking, one arm resting on the car door. When he saw her come out, he looked at her with a deep gaze, as well as the makeup on her face and the clothes she was wearing. Get in. When she walked closer, his voice was calm and emotionless. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.